President Barack Obama is making a final push to close the Guantanamo Bay prison in Cuba. The Pentagon has proposed moving the remaining 91 detainees from the facility, which costs up to $475 million a year to run. The move comes less than a year before Obama's set to leave office, but a full 8 years after he promised to close the prison during his first term as president. Now, President Obama said the prison hurts the fight against terror and is contrary to the country's values.
For many years, it's been clear that the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay does not advance our national security. It undermines it. This is not just my opinion. This is the opinion of experts. This is the opinion of many in our military. It's counterproductive to our fight against terrorists because they use it as propaganda in their efforts to recruit. It drains military resources. With nearly $450 million spent last year alone to keep it running, and more than $200 million in additional costs needed to keep it open going forward for less than 100 detainees. Guantanamo harms our partnerships with allies and other countries whose cooperation we need against terrorism. When I talk to other world leaders, they bring up the fact that Guantanamo is not resolved.
Well, let's take a closer look at the Guantanamo Bay detention camp and why it's been so controversial. Now, since it opened in 2002, around 780 people have been imprisoned, including more than 20 children. 91 people are still being held at the detention camp. 34 of them are incarcerated despite being cleared for release. Now, since 2002, 9 have died in custody. 28 prisoners are behind bars despite the fact that there's not enough evidence to prosecute them. And 8 have been convicted by military commissions. Well, for reaction, let's go to Colin Campbell, who's in our Washington bureau there in DC. So, Colin, what did Obama outline in his proposals?
Well, he gave a pretty simple 4-point plan, and one of the first things he says he wants to do is pretty obvious. He wants to remove detainees from Guantanamo Bay Detention Center in hopes to close it down for good. Now, those detainees would be housed in other countries or they would come to the United States. Of course, that is yet to be determined with the remaining detainees. The second point that he wanted to emphasize is that he wanted to expedite the process of detainees that would sit in front of a periodic review board, and that board would look at the status of the detainees, where they would be in the legal process. And that's probably the largest sticking point here, and the point that has the most details, and that's the legal process of how these detainees would either be transferred or kept indefinitely or put in a maximum security prison. They would have to go through a legal process called Article 3 or military commissions. And of course, President Obama talked about the details of that and how they would go through that process in federal court. The fourth point would be for Congress to look at various sites where a maximum security prison would be built to house the remaining detainees that they deemed that they could not release. And of course, Congress would obviously be pushing back on this because they've already done some exploration in various states such as South Carolina, Kansas, and Colorado. Lawmakers from those states have already clearly said that they do not want any detainees to be put there. They believe that it would be a threat to national security, and they frankly don't want any criminals of that nature, of that status, in their communities.
Now, Colin, the president talks about the high cost of running Guantanamo Bay, I guess appealing to taxpayers who will be annoyed at just how much it does cost. So how much are we talking about here?
Well, he talked about $450 million a year, but experts say in order to keep Guantanamo Bay Prison open, there would have to be an additional $225 million in repairs. Now, proposals right now to build those other prisons in the United States would cost anywhere between $270 to $305 million, but the White House estimates that could save taxpayers about $85 million a year.
Well, Colin, for us in Washington, thank you so much.